Howdy, strangers. Recently, I was able to take a part of an interview with one of the BRM5 devs, Kitgat. He's in charge of the game design. All the questions that I asked him will be in the description of the video, so that way you all can get an understanding of what I asked him. A majority of the stuff is in relation to the weapon balancing of the game, why the guns are the way they are, and other just little fun trivial facts. So I hope you all enjoy. Just want to go ahead and thank KitGat for taking time out of his day to be a part of an interview with me. It means a whole lot. Yeah, just go ahead and enjoy. All right. Mr. KitGat, what is your job specifically as a BRM5 developer?
Yeah, so like I started off as a voice actor, just doing like small favors, and then um progressively like in the months leading up to Resurgence, probably like half a year or so prior, I was doing a lot of the story writing and stuff. Um it's weird to trace back. I picked up a lot of small jobs, but started off doing voice acting, then went on to do like a bunch of kind of graphic design stuff. I was mostly just designing logos and writing descriptions, and then a lot to do with like the names of items in the game. So most of the stuff that was written for the main menu was mine,
Mm-hmm.
and then did basically all of the dialogue writing for quests and prepared some stuff for it to be translated and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it wasn't until like 6.0.7, which is like when the 416 was added. Like right after that is when I started working on weapon config, which is just like stats for everything. So damage, range, fucking fire rate, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I still do a lot of the story writing, still do the graphic design stuff. I pick up just a lot of small jobs, a lot of the
The more
weird, tedious
miscellaneous
things.
stuff, right?
Yeah, and the other thing is I do a lot of the oversight and consulting for things like weapons, gear, and vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of not really quality checking, more just ensuring that everything's um, real world accurate and
Gotcha.
whatnot.
Yeah. So I guess the one thing that I do want to ask you though is whenever Operation Resurgence like first dropped, and there were like weapon descriptions and stuff like that, like the ump had like its description had like no luck on this side of the border, like basically references to like movies and just like pop culture and
Yeah,
stuff like that. Was that stuff that you did specifically?
yeah, that was stuff that I wrote.
Gotcha.
Um, it started off just as hey, we're gonna be pushing Resurgence, and we need to change some names of weapons because um, trademarks and
Mm-hmm.
trademark infringement and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, cool, I can do that. And it took like 5 minutes. And they're like, oh, by the way, if you want to write like descriptions, I was like, okay. I mean, you come up with something funny. Like I kind of got carried away. That seems to be a common theme is that I'll just take something and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
Decide I'd make stupid references to video games or movies.
I remember
I
the old
think like
Glock's description being 17 shots, no 38.
yeah, like Fetty Wap or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think some people have figured it out. The wiki does an okay job of finding out what those are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what like I remember one of the big things wasn't the I think I remember. I don't know if this is just me that remembers it, but there was like some guns at the very beginning of Operation Resurgence that their names were like misspelt. Like I think the Makarov was misspelt and was like something completely
So,
different.
yeah, the Makarov was Makarov, and the
Mm-hmm.
reason that is because that's a config name, like it's a name that the game uses in code
Mm-hmm.
to like reference it. So it may be called the Makarov PM or whatever it is to the player,
Mm-hmm.
but if I pull up like right now, I can just pull up the config folder, and it'll still say Makarov. So I have barrels.markov.threaded, mags.markov underscore drum and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like that doesn't change, but you can change the display name of stuff, which is why stuff gets renamed so often.
Gotcha. Was there like Are there any other like nickname? Like, was that a nickname or was that literally just like a typo for it?
That was just a typo. I mean, honestly, there's like, if I look, there's like some stuff is still like the XM1020, which is funny. Like instead of the XM2010,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's some typos. I mean, it doesn't actually matter because the player
Yeah,
doesn't
of
see any of
course.
this.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was interested to see about like the and I completely forgot about the misspellings of some of the weapon names at the beginning of the drop because I know some of them were of course to like avoid copyrights and stuff like that. That makes sense. And actually, that's one thing I just realized now. The HK416, right? Whenever it first got added, it was the DWF416. Then later
Yeah,
on, it had been changed to the RF416. What
yeah.
was the point in that change?
It's
Was that
just DWO sounds fucking lame. That's really the only reason.
fair enough? I can respect that answer. I didn't know if there was like, Lord knows, like some like the HK was like, nah,
No,
that's
like
too close.
DWF is a stupid name. I'm not gonna go too in depth with it, but it's 3 letters. It's a really long word for no reason at all.
Mm-hmm.
HK is 2 letters. RF is 2 letters. It's something that at least players are okay with referring to. No one's gonna say DWF 416 in normal conversation, but
Yeah.
maybe you can tolerate RF.
Mm-hmm.
Realistically, I don't give a shit if you call it HK RF. Doesn't matter. Everyone
Yeah.
knows what it is.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. All right. Well, I guess we'll just go ahead and move on to my second question I have for you here which is how do you go about balancing a specific weapon category? Like, is there a certain playstyle that goes with a specific category, such as snipers being used more so for long range, of course, or shotguns being used more so for its intended purpose of being, well, more commonly known as being CQC based?
It used to be that um, the weapons were kind of configured around the ranges that you play at PvP at. So up
Mm-hmm.
until recently, there was no damage drop off. In fact, there's never been damage drop off in the game. I didn't believe this for the longest time, but um, that's how it kind of was. So that's why the back then the XM 2010 was a one hit kills everything, and shotguns were like they had a very short cutoff range. Like it was all around. Um, the approach was all around just the average PvP engagement, which wasn't really more than like 50 studs or so.
Mm-hmm.
So things like ranged performance didn't really matter, and so it was just basically like, what would I expect a sniper rifle to do at 50 studs, and then you go from there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it was for a long time. I kind of picked up on it when I first started doing this,
Mm-hmm.
and just like going with the flow. So I was like, okay, I'll just approximate to 3 hit kills. Okay, the M16 will 3 hit to the limbs, and then the M4s, okay, we'll make it 4 hit to the limbs, and so on and so forth. And
Mm-hmm.
what the with most like shooter games, they'll have like a jack of all trades or a base weapon that all other weapons in the game are balanced off of.
Mm-hmm.
And so in our case, it was the M16A2 because it's the starter weapon, and basically everything else was scaled around the M16A2. So it's like
Gotcha.
the M4, okay, it's a short barrel, it's automatic. Okay, we'll make it less damaging and higher recoil than the M16.
Mm-hmm.
Or like the AKs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll make them a little higher damaging and a little higher recoiling. And like the sniper rifles, it's like, okay, well, in the time it takes for you to kill someone with an M16, we'll ensure that with the sniper rifles. So we'll make the XM 2010 like a one hit kill and whatnot. So that long story short, that's how most shooter games do it. Is you pick a base weapon class and everything else is balanced around that.
Gotcha.
As for now, excuse me. As for now, it's actually very easy.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since the new damage model came out, it's really just been as simple as doing some research into what the weapon is supposed to do,
Mm-hmm.
and copying and pasting that. And it's not just because I'm lazy. It's because it's very, very consistent. So if you take, say, I'm going to use the M16 again. If you
Mm-hmm.
take the M16, you go on Wikipedia and look it up, it's like, I don't know, like 700 or 800 or so rounds per minute. Okay, we copy and paste that. That's easy.
Mm-hmm.
Range and damage, we'll just we'll convert, feet to studs. It's a one-to-one thing. So 3,000 feet to 3,000 studs. Put that in. The amount of damage is really just where everything gets scaled off of one another. So if now that most rounds one hit kill to the head, it's just everything else scales off of that. Consequently, if we were to say, okay, now the M16 will two-shot kill to the head, most weapons are going to be within that range.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, all this to say that most of the stat changes happen like relative to each other. So when people say like, make this weapon one hit kill because it should, or make this weapon uh not not so high damaging, it's like, well, the problem is if I were to decrease the damage on this, all the other kinds of weapons, the other kinds of bullets and rounds
Mm-hmm.
in that same class or category have to change too.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to say, all right, all of like, if I say 45, like the pistol,
Mm-hmm. ACP. Yeah.
yeah, if I take that from a 2 hit kill to a 3 hit kill, and all the 9 mil pistols are still a 2 hit kill, those have to be like less than that, just for logic's sake.
Mm-hmm. So, that being said, if a submachine gun got like a buffer nerf, so go to like the MP5, 9 millimeter, right? If the
Yeah.
MP5 got a buff for whatever reason, the damage is better on it. Would that mean that the pistols would also have to have their damage buffs as well, or would that just have to be the other 9 millimeter, submachine guns as well?
The mindset on this has changed a lot. It used to be that I would just make them um barely short of the submachine gun damage, and then when the new damage model dropped, I just made it so the damage model, like the damage graph, is shared between all 9 mil handguns and submachine guns, regardless.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that these graphs work is they're completely dependent on velocity.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is fair. Like that is what determines how much oomph a bullet's gonna have.
Yeah.
So, and we have a graph that has damage over velocity, and we have another graph that is velocity over barrel length. And so we'll have a weapon with a barrel length. It goes into that graph. That graph spits out a velocity. We plug that velocity into the damage graph. Boom, there's your damage number.
Mm-hmm.
What has what was supposed to happen as a result of that was submachine guns and handguns were supposed to be really similar. Like when 6.5 dropped, it was very much the case where
Mm-hmm.
the MP5 and like basically all 9 mil handguns felt pretty similar. Like you could one hit
Yeah.
kill
A
with all of those,
lot of
and
people were upset about that.
that yeah, and that was really the point. And I'll fully accept like whatever fucking backlash people have about that, but that was the intention of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely intentional. Was so that it doesn't matter. We're not just gonna arbitrarily change what bullets do just because it's coming out of a pistol.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, the actual velocity increase or the damage, quote unquote, between like a pistol length, like a 5-inch pistol barrel, and like an 8 or 9 inch submachine gun barrel is very, very small. Maybe not even more than like 100 or so feet per second. So like
Mm-hmm.
the damage being similar isn't even that far off from reality.
Gotcha. So, what you're basically saying is that if you had it your way, you would actually revert the changes on the pistols?
I would. That was the thing. after 6.5, a lot of people complain that pistols are really good, and it's like, yeah, that's actually true. And pistols one hit killing, I don't think is really the problem. It's pistols being able to one hit kill at like all ranges reliably,
Mm-hmm.
and people using them because people are also taking advantage of the fact that there's basically no weapon spread. So like, yeah, one hit kill pistol, no brainer, you're gonna use that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so damage wise, yes, ideally the damage would be reversed, and it would just be, um, yeah, it'd be how it was when 6.5 dropped.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
As for why it was changed in the first place, I was out at some training on the East Coast, and I wasn't actually working at the time, and so I kind of handed the burden off to MB and NAR at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And for what it's worth, like, understand they have a lot on their plate, so
Of
you
course.
can.
Yeah.
I don't expect them to go through all the considerations and implications that have to go through with basically having all pistol damage, but that's what happened. It was just
Mm-hmm.
the damage values themselves were just cut in half for pistols.
Gotcha.
And it wasn't, which is, in my mind, it's not a pretty change because it wasn't like, 85%. It wasn't like 60%. It wasn't like a number where you could really tie to like a specific number of hits to kill
Mm-hmm.
and like where you would want pistols to be. It was just, oh, pistols do a lot of damage. We're just going to cut it in half. It was, in my opinion, it was a very hastily thought out decision,
Mm-hmm.
and we haven't really touched back on it yet.
Gotcha. Do you ever think you will touch back on it, or is this just?
Oh
something-
yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
Like the reason why pistol damage is such an issue is just that the whole like handling state right now with pistols being super precise
Mm-hmm.
is why we really can't have pistols one hit killing everything right now.
Yeah.
If it was the case where like a pistol is very difficult to control and a pistol like is not really that effective past a few hundred studs, then yeah, you know what, we'll make the damage realistic again.
Mm-hmm. So I know this has been, and this isn't on the list, of course, but I know the Deagle has been a massive problem for that pistol balancing you're talking about. Because before, of course, I'm sure you remember with the extended barrel, the Deagle could two-tap limbs everywhere. And then it got nerfed, and, it couldn't one-shot head anymore. So basically, it went from being by far the best secondary in the game, like not even like a competition, to being like probably the worst one, debatably. The Makarov's down there as well, but not the point. So it's like, it was just interesting to see with the balancing changes that came around with the pistols, to go see people complaining about the Deagle being too overpowered, to the people complaining about like, oh, the Deagle's like too weak now because now it can't one-shot head. There's no point in using the Deagle over like a standard like 9mm handgun,
Yeah, and I agree with them. Like, when I say that the decision was made hastily, I mean every single round that the pistols used was cut in half. Doesn't matter if it was 45, 9x19, 9x18, 50 AE, whatever it was, just 50% damage across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And so all that careful scaling that happened to get the Deagle damage to where it was just short. Like when 6.5 dropped, it was just short of a 2-hit kill to the limbs with the longest barrel on it. Like, that was intentional.
Mm-hmm.
When we did that, took it from just short of a 2-hit kill to actually a 5-hit kill to the limbs.
Mm-hmm.
The Deagle, which in basically every iteration in video games is a 1-hit kill at least to the face, is now a 2-hit kill. Like, yeah, I completely understand why you'd be upset about that.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, like, I'm aware of that, but and the only reason I'm not changing it right now is, one, because we haven't really had any major feature patches come. Two is that when I fix something, I don't want to just increase the Deagle damage and leave everything else in the dust.
Mm-hmm.
Rather make it so that the Deagle has like gains back its niche, and the rest of the pistols do as well.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense.
And like not everyone agrees with that. Like some people would rather just have us push small incremental patches to fix things like this, and there are pros and cons of doing that. We just prefer to push a lot of stuff together, just because it doesn't require as many branches of the game to maintain.
I think I remember Grav mentioning that before about
Yeah.
like making like small map changes like PvP just to fix like small things whenever they could just do it in all one big.
Yeah,
So-
a few months ago they did like an actual podcast answering a lot of questions, and they're basically saying what I just said, which was like that's why we don't do a lot of small updates.
Yeah. Gotcha. And while we're still on the topic of secondaries right here, is the Makarov always been like a meme pistol? What's going on with the Makarov really?
To be fair, like the Makarov was like in real life it is kind of a shitty pistol in the sense that the round that it fires and the actual mechanical function of the weapon and just the features the weapon has are really I don't want to say it. They're just
Outdated?
really lackluster.
Gotcha.
And most of the reasons why like the Makarov is mediocre isn't actually because it's a mediocre pistol in real life. It's mediocre compared to other handguns, but like from a manufacturing standpoint, like the pistol is awesome. It's very simple. It's a straight blowback, whatever it is. Like it doesn't really apply to the average gamer. And I say this not to like absolutely thrash on the gamer like stereotype. It's that the benefits of the Makarov and why like it's a very popular pistol in real life don't always translate into the game. Like people aren't manufacturing their pistols in game, so the Makarov's perks don't really show.
Gotcha. Because I think that's always one really funny thing. Because I think like back in Nightfall, maybe like the Makarov was by far like the best pistol in the game, like no competition. And then it's just been like always the worst ever since. It got hit with one nerf and it's always been the worst.
Yeah, and like I'll fully admit, like back when I wasn't even doing work for the game, like I would just do Big Mac strats with my buddies, and we would just grab Makarovs and just start tapping people. Back when I did a one-hit kill to the head, and it was fun. Like
Yeah.
fully admit, especially with the burst fire, it was super fun.
I forgot it had burst.
Like that was probably like the most fun I've had. It wasn't even that Viper's PvP itself was all that fun. I think it was all the quirkiness of the weapons was fun. Like automatic pistols, shotguns. That lack of polish in some ways made that gameplay a lot kookier and a lot more fun. And I fully admit, like that was awesome.
I think that's what a lot of people miss, if I'm being honest, when people talk about like Viper and just like the nostalgia for it, is that the gunplay was just more goofy. For
Yeah,
better or
yeah.
worse.
I fully agree, and like I've also admit to like being that guy who got the 103, the AK 103, put the shortest barrel on it, and got like a 50 rounder magazine on it because like it was a really just solid weapon to hit kill everywhere. Like,
Yep.
I definitely took advantage of it back then. The only reason why, well, there are several reasons, but the reason why we haven't gone back to kookier, I guess, configs is one, it's not consistent, and that really just doesn't work for a game that's trying to go in a more realistic direction. But two, there's always the issue with, I don't want to say power creep. It's not necessarily power creep, but it's new players coming in and seeing that there isn't really a defined variety. And yes, there is a meta, but there's also just, for a game that is supposed to be about dressing up your character and fucking like role playing, whatever like that. Why are we going to just arbitrarily make this thing super good
Mm-hmm.
and kind of discourage people from exploring the sandbox, so to speak?
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways around that. Like the Makarov got a drum magazine, and it's the only weapon with a drum magazine for that very reason. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
very specific, like purpose built thing, and it's the joke is the price is probably a joke, but
Isn't like the
that
real life
is
counterpart like a PPSH magazine?
I think it
It's
is
just like welded
PPSH
on,
magazine.
if I
Yeah,
remember correctly.
yeah. And so like when we look at weapons, like say the what is it? The PP2000. The PP2000 is kind of the new punching bag right now.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways you can make the PP2000 like good. It shoots like a special kind of round, like an armor piercing round. So we could absolutely explore that at some point
Mm-hmm.
and give it some other quirks
Mm-hmm.
that are true to life, but
Wouldn't you also have to
end up
consider the
making
P90 and MP7 with that though?
yeah. Like and this is where we get into like it's not that real life isn't balanced per se or that making stuff realistic is boring. It's that you need to support all of that,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So the MP7, the P90 kind of pea shooter weapons, low recoil pea shooter weapons are actually a lot better than they should be right now. However, you know, if you add like soft body armor in the game, those rounds just zip through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those have a place now to defeat that armor. Like that's why they were made in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
We could go all sorts of directions. The more and more we explore like the actual kind of minute capabilities of those rounds or those weapons or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we're not doing that right now because it's very easy to get into feature creep, and honestly, it's most people will just look at a weapon and think, hey, you know what, this has high damage, this has good range, or this works for my playstyle, and they'll run with it. And that's for the most part been how people have chosen weapons. Most people aren't really in the mood to do all sorts of number crunching just to find what the perfect balanced solution is.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just pick a weapon that they like and run with it.
Yep. Gotcha. So, in your opinion, what has been the hardest weapons to balance in BRM5, and why is that?
Probably sniper rifles easily. This actually kind of breaks my heart in a way because sniper rifles are supposed to be like we have this idea as people that play video games that it's like the sniper is this holy laser beam that deletes people, and like that is true for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But here's some background. There's a really good video published about sniper rifles and why it's so annoying to balance them. You probably look it up, but you just search like snipers a nightmare for players and game devs or something like that.
I believe I've
But
already seen it actually. I think it's like
you probably
from
have.
Ahoy, maybe?
I think so. It's a really popular video. Like you'll come across it.
Definitely.
It's a great breakdown of just you know what, I went through the exact same thought processes. Like, okay, we'll make the sniper rifle like one hit out to this range. Well, okay, we have to make it one hit out to these ranges because it's meant to be a long range weapon. Okay, well, what if we make it really sluggish to cycle? Oh wait, we can't make it too sluggish because now it's just annoying to use. Okay, well, what if we made it super heavy? No, that also makes it annoying to use. So we're going back and forth with all these design considerations while still trying to keep the weapons somewhat realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've settled on as an eventual solution is the sniper rifle is going to occupy a niche still. This does mean you're not going to have like people will still try, but you're not usually going to have people running around quick scoping each other, reliably getting kills up close.
Mm-hmm.
But it will be the weapon to pick, in, say, 25v25 open world, ranges like outside of what you usually see in PvP, that will be the weapon to kill people with, because nothing else really compares at that range. That's where they're supposed to be. And the
Yeah.
reason we don't see that right now is, one, in PvP, most engagements are within like 100, 150 or so studs. Like,
And that's at
you
most.
can't see the benefits of a sniper rifle at that range, especially considering that, you know, in the real world, the sniper is usually miles out or however far out. I keep referencing real life in this because that is to some extent what weapon design in video games follows. For the longest time, sniper rifles weren't even added to games because they couldn't afford to really do it justice, to make the sniper rifle like a precision long range weapon, because you didn't have the render distance back then. You do now, but that goes both ways. Okay, we make sniper rifles really good at range, but how do we make them? How do we make other weapons more compelling? Okay, well, we need to diversify the way that players and even the open world enemies fight at different ranges. So anytime something changes with weapons, the behavior of like the enemy, so to speak, has to change too. And right now, I understand like most people don't track what happens with open world, but we haven't touched AI, like their capabilities for the most part, not their stats. Those have been pretty stagnant. So ideally, when we do a big change to like ballistics again, the AI's ability has to change as well, so that they can fight better at longer range. So that, you know, you have a reason to pick the sniper rifle or pick the assault rifle, just depending on your approach.
Did you ever find struggle balancing the shotguns though? I know there's only two, so it's not like as difficult I'd say with the snipers, where there's like five. But do you find like much difficulty with the shotguns?
No, not really. And you think of those because shotguns are incredibly powerful right now. And the reality is that I'm perfectly fine with shotguns being amazing right now, largely because we haven't really diversified the PvP engagement ranges yet. So, yeah, you know what? Sub 150 studs, shotguns are good. Great. Like, that's they're in their zone right now. At some point when we decide, hey, let's add a larger map, hey, let's have a different kind of objective that maybe encourages you to fight at greater ranges, something like that, shotguns are going to start to show their flaws a lot more.
Yes.
They're really good right now because it's a CQB oriented weapon in a CQB oriented game. Like, great, the shotgun works as it's designed. I can understand right now how there's kind of a defined meta, and honestly, the shotgun doesn't even occupy it that much. The AA-12 is pretty good, but you can also get work done with a 416, Mark 18, M16s, or whatever. And we saw this happen with 25v25. Like, that was probably the most eye-opening, not even testing, just the most eye-opening observations we could have made, because we now see the player reacting to two different things happening. Is one, the damage model changes, and weapons, like their performance at range, completely changes. And two, they now have an environment to actually take advantage of that range. So in 25v25, the first thing people did was leap to the sniper rifles because they're like, sweet, this is going to be awesome. Some time passes, and that moves to, you know what? The sniper rifle isn't perfect for me. I like to rush in every now and then. Okay, I'll pick a rifle, just a normal rifle instead. DMRs drop. Those become very, very useful. And I think right now there's still very much a go-to option in 25v25. And the reason why that's helpful is because that is really one of the best environments that we can see all of the engagement ranges play out. there's the Heart Valley map where you have a city and then you have the outskirts where you can really just pick between, hey, do I want to engage up close? Do I want to go at a distance? And I've went in like I tried the AA-12, tried an M110, the SVD, M16s, like even the pistols at some point, the PP2000. I went and ran all of those in that Heart Valley map, and I've been able to put them to work in assuming the conditions are right and they're being used in the situation that they're supposed to be used in.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I see that happening, it's like, okay, good. At least the intention of the balancing is working, even though players may not understand that.
Mm-hmm. So I know before you've mentioned the meta, of course, very popular in the PvP community, of course. So what do you think is the most popular weapons in PvP as of right now? Like
I think
what
it
is your meta?
depends. Like, it really depends based on like the star level of the players, and that's something that we can kind of get sucked into as mostly 5-star, been around for a long time players. Is that people tend to just gravitate towards the same weapon around here, and we don't really see outside of there unless we make an effort to look kind of at new up and coming players.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, right now the 416 is the hotness, and you know what? I don't blame people. It's a very cool weapon. The 416, the Mark 18, the MP7, even like the common thing there is you have fast firing. Relatively high damaging weapons. Not so much for the MP7, but at least it's a low recoil kind of laser beam weapon, and you can have fun with that. The 416, one hit kills to the head, very fast, probably the best in class rate of fire. It's very like interchangeable parts and all that, so you can customize. It really is just everybody's flavor at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so that for 5-star players, that really is kind of the meta right now. Every now and then I'll hop into a lobby like on an alt account and just see like what people are using at the lower star levels.
Yeah.
You'll see the occasional 416 if somebody joins the game and they already have their heart set on it, or they see a video where it's like, ooh, this is the best gun in the game by the 416. Cool. Like they'll do that.
Yeah.
I've been seeing a lot more M4s, a lot more M16s. The AK-74 is very popular for obvious reasons. It's just a really fucking well-rounded weapon. Shotguns, I'm still yet to see them like become overly popular. So, but it's still like the generalist rifle is very, very popular right now, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, especially if it's the M16, the M4, the 416, the AK-74. I know the AK-103 has kind of been dashed to the side for now. That's what I think the meta is right now. I would like to see a lot more DMR use. Would like to see a lot more like M16s and things like that. But I can understand why people don't, because the game doesn't necessarily encourage you to do that. The extra damage and range doesn't really make sense when the M4 one-hit kills to the head does pretty much the same damage at PvP ranges, and it's automatic. So I can understand why people don't gravitate towards that.
Gotcha. And I think one thing I do want to ask you, though, is you keep bringing up the M16 a lot. Is there like a specific reason why you think that's probably like one of the better guns in the game?
I don't necessarily think it's... for one, it is one of the better guns in the game, because that is just its design. It's a low recoil, some of the highest damage in its class, like weapons. I also go back to that because of what I kind of said earlier, how every weapon is balanced around or off of the M16, specifically the A2. It's a starter weapon, which is why I bring it up a lot. It's like, that is, in my opinion, the M16, if I'm able to clear all of the game's content with a bone stock M16, we're doing pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing is like I don't want people to feel pressured into like we give people the option to, but if you're not interested in building out a gun and you just play the game to fly helicopters or something or dress up or whatever you do,
Mm-hmm.
then cool, you have that option. Like the starter gear should be enough to get you through the game.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Cool. So I do want to ask this because obviously balancing is a very sensitive subject no matter what you do with it. So what game mode is balancing actually based around, if there is one?
Back when I first started working on this, it was PvP.
Mm-hmm.
And that was largely because I was really trying to learn the entire meta of the game, and as a result, I played a ton of PvP at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, MB and I have this running joke every time we play PvP because we're not just playing PvP, we're doing quote research on the state of the game and the
Mm-hmm.
state of the meta.
Yeah.
And so we go and just play hours of PvP, and we'd excuse that as, oh yeah, we're just doing research and getting an idea.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that was really all that the weapons were balanced around at that point was PvP.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, especially for leading up to the quest update, was when my attention started to turn to PvE, specifically open world.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because with Quest, we expected to see a lot more people gravitating towards open world. And so if we have a PvP focused game, like a PvP focused weapon config or stat table or whatever it is, like if
Mm-hmm.
those PvP focused stats were employed so much in open world, it would
Mm-hmm.
throw people off. Surprisingly, not a whole lot of changes had to happen, probably because most of the enemies are 100 or so HP, just like players.
Yeah.
Um, Not a whole lot had to happen. What did happen at the time was just a lot of considerations for range and barrel length. So around that time, I did a painstaking amount of not really math, but just bouncing back and forth between spreadsheets, correcting velocity values, range values,
Mm-hmm.
um, for different barrel lengths, and it was largely just to make it so the barrels were a little truer to life, and that we didn't have ludicrously high range values for certain weapons that didn't make sense.
Gotcha. Hmm.
As of now, um, I can pretty confidently say that 25v25 is where the focus is, and it's for the reasons that I mentioned before, where that is really the only environment in the game where I see like the full spectrum of ranges between close quarters, mid 200, 300 studs, 400 plus studs out engagements.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't see that really anywhere else. You can't see it in PvP because the maps aren't big enough. You really don't see it in PvE open world because most players will just run into a location, and because of the way enemies spawn, like it doesn't make sense to engage at such a distance anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So 25v25, like perfect environment to see changes affect things. And because it's not AI units, it's players, they react more or less on the spot to changes that are made. So like if tomorrow I decided to make pistol damage the way it was again, guarantee you lots more pistol kills in the coming weeks after that update.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to make the M2010 deal a 1-hit kill to the torso with the standard 24-inch barrel, like the default barrel,
Mm-hmm.
guarantee you a bunch of people are going to be using that.
Gotcha.
If the Hecate 2,
Mm-hmm.
if that gained 1-hit kill to the limbs, guarantee you, but right, So basically, players are going to react a lot faster to those changes, and they have the environment to do that, which is why 25v25 is my mode of focus.
Gotcha. Okay. So I feel like I might as well go and ask this now. I know we've already talked about secondaries and how you were off doing other stuff, so Nar and MB handled the damage balancing with the secondaries and they got halved. But has there been any other events where community input has affected balancing changes that you can think of?
There's not a whole lot of input that comes from PvP that hasn't already been said. A lot of that comes in the form of just it used to be that we had a lot of joke weapons or weapons that really weren't that viable.
Mm-hmm.
The UMP-45 for the longest time was just an absolute meme of a weapon. It's a 45 submachine gun, but for some reason did less damage than the MP5.
Mm-hmm.
You had the AUGs, which for the longest time did one hit kill to the head, when all the other rifles didn't. You had the Mark 18 doing probably more damage than it should have to the body. You had a lot of weird things to happen, and for me, like, the best way that I found this out was, one, just reading chat, like in the main Platinum 5 Discord, but just reading the chat and seeing what people were complaining about, and then I would get into arguments with people about it, because when people are complaining about something, they tend to be very open about it.
Mm-hmm.
So things like the UMP-45, that was squashed pretty fast, kind of quietly, because we didn't actually announce that. Things like the UMP changes, the barrel length changes, the AUGs, one hit killing consistently or not. Shotguns kind of teetered back and forth between being like spread machines to being kind of a more deliberate weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that comes from changes in, I guess, the players that I tend to see.
Mm-hmm.
At least from what I've seen, and it absolutely is valid that I may be carving out an echo chamber for myself, or that I don't explore enough of these communities.
Mm-hmm.
In the main chat, I see a lot of casual PvE players that like to have weapons depicted somewhat true to life. Not perfectly. Most people don't care for like perfect values and very true to life adjustments, but the likeness of a weapon is what they more or less care about.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that kind of be the norm, as opposed to before, where you had a lot of players that played both, and they did care just about seeing every weapon be somewhat viable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the priorities kind of shifted from making all the weapons viable. Yeah, making all of the weapons viable to getting the small intricacies right.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
But I don't think any particular event really spurred these changes, because quite frankly, we haven't had an event like that.
Mm-hmm.
Even when Quest released, like, not the feedback didn't really change that much. A lot of it was kind of just complaints about the way damage changed, which was valid, but it's like it was not as jarring of a change as, say, 6.5, where everything got its head and torso damage radically increased.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So I feel like I'm also going to ask now, because I've already talked about community input, but I feel like it might be important also to talk about what your favorite guns in BRM5 are, because I don't know if there's any personal bias that goes into making balance changes. Because of course, if there is a gun that you particularly like in BRM5 that just happens to be in the game, is there any personal bias that whenever you try like balancing it, like, I'm sure of course you try your best not to, but do you ever think there's personal bias for some of the weapons in the game?
No, yeah, so there's absolutely some bias when it comes to that, and part of that has to do with just upbringing and, you know, I'll just say flat out full disclosure, like my personal favorite weapon in the game is the M4A1. It was what I was issued. It's what I've used the most. Like I've researched this weapon in and out.
Mm-hmm.
I know so much about like its designated performance and what it's supposed to do at certain ranges, even the round it fires. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've been so keen on really fully fleshing out the M4. At the same time, I think a weapon's downsides are also part of its identity. So the 6.5 was really where I got to explore this, where the torso damage of the 5.56 round, like with the M16s and the M4s and the Mark 18s and all that,
Mm-hmm.
the torso damage radically drops around 2,700 to 2,500 feet per second.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a phenomenon that is almost unique to the 5.56 round, which is also why the 416 and the Mark 18, at their 10-inch barrel lengths, are not really that useful past like 50 or so studs.
Mm-hmm.
And that is intentional in my opinion, because well, not just in my, that is completely intentional because that is the range that, you know, those weapons are made to work at. And I will concede that there are weapons that you normally see as like opponents to the M4, like the AK-74, the AK-103. That's actually a different story. More on that later. But like the AK-74, where they have a lot more consistent performance out to all ranges.
Mm-hmm.
And the weapon itself, like the round itself, is actually softer recoiling than 5.56. So I intend to represent that too.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that the Russians do with the 74, with like the muzzle brake, where they're actually just fantastic weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So in my, I guess, I absolutely have a bias, flat out. I do have a bias.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to think that my desire to represent the M4 true to life somewhat accurately also resulted in pretty much all other weapons getting the same attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
The AS Val is probably one of my favorite rounds to configure because it's a really interesting cartridge. The
Mm-hmm.
subsonic round and its effectiveness really taps out much shorter than pretty much all other weapons in the game.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to be kind of a special purpose weapon. And even though most people don't use it that way in the game, I've always been happy that the round's performance more or less reflects that.
Gotcha. I know you're more of a gun guy than I am. Well, maybe. Is the SR3M also chambered in the same thing as the AS Val is? Like, are they
Yep,
both subsonic? Okay.
they can be. There are other variants of the round. It is a subsonic round, but there are also
Mm-hmm.
other variants. And I think the SR3M is made to use like a different like armor piercing variant.
Gotcha. Because I know the whole thing with the SR3M is it's basically a carbine version of the AS Val,
Yep.
and that
Hmm.
like, because a big core component of the AS Val is that integral suppressor with it.
Hmm.
So I guess that's why I've always wondered with the SR3M, if you take off that suppressor, then like, hey, is the caliber still as effective as it's supposed to be, or is it just a new caliber? Like, is it a different caliber entirely, not a new caliber?
Yeah. And no, the round is still technically subsonic. Like the weapon in general, I kind of wish we didn't do this, but the reload animations are reused. The
Mm-hmm.
um, I would like to actually have the other variant be used for the SR3M, just to make it a little different. Its rate of fire is a little more. Um, its barrel's a little shorter. The other thing is that you can't really represent the benefits of that integral suppressor, where it's just infinitely more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Like in BRM, the suppressor you pick does not matter. Apart from weight and recoil reduction and looks, all suppressors do the same thing. There's just two settings on that the game views for a gunshot. There's suppressed and unsuppressed. And it's literally just, okay, suppressed, cool, we remove the muzzle flash and give it a different sound. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, and this goes back months, but at some point I want all suppressors to have their own pros and cons. But something like that really doesn't have that much gameplay value,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't go very high up the totem pole.
Of course. So would you consider yourself more so of an AK or an AR guy? Because from what I'm hearing, it's AR all the way.
Yeah, I'm more of an AR guy. I've only used AKs like twice in my life, ever.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. All right, so I know you've mentioned that with BRM5 balancing, you also try to reflect the IRL counterparts of these weapons. So I'm curious about how do you go recreating their IRL counterparts? Do you use books, videos as like what do you use as references basically to base them off of?
I mean, yes. Books, books and videos are one. I did a lot of reading when it came to ballistics, and I used videos to get an idea of the weapon's like handling characteristics as well as its actual like mechanical performance. So things like rate of fire. If you look up a weapon right now, like the M4, if you look up an M4 on Wikipedia, it'll probably give you something between the lines of like 700 to 900 rounds per minute. So like, what do you do with that? I mean, with some games, they'll just set it to a flat 750 rounds per minute and call it a day.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, I'll go and pull up some videos of an M4 firing full auto in these conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I can get an idea of what the weapon is actually going to do and how where in that range I want it to be. And the thing with military M4s that people don't really understand is that these weapons are rotated through dudes over and over. They're run in all sorts of conditions, the ambient temperature, the types of ammo you use,
Mm-hmm.
all of that affects the weapon performance. So when you see 700 to 900 rounds per minute, that's just a range of, taking all those factors into account.
Mm-hmm.
So, realistically, an M4 with current issue, like high pressure ammo is probably going to be pretty high up. In fact, it's probably a lot closer to what you're seeing out of the Mark 18 or the 416, like up near 800, 850, possibly 900 rounds per minute.
Mm-hmm.
So for things like that, I'll refer to videos for the most part. Ballistics, mostly reading, and then a lot of ballistics field tests.
Mm-hmm.
I was the bulk of the reading I do is Dr. Factor's publication on terminal ballistics. It's a fancy way of saying like what bullets do when they hit the target.
Yeah, of course.
And I've used his source because when those publications came out, they completely changed like how the research on that topic was done.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, that is actually the case. Like, I'm not going to go in depth on it, but reading through all the research done and data that has been collected on, for lack of a better term, just people that have gotten shot, is very much the most reliable source I have to make these kinds of decisions.
Gotcha.
As for things like weight, I'm fortunate enough to have access to a lot of this stuff, and I can just go in and weigh it if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So magazines and the weights of ammo are actually very, very true to life. Not that it matters, but those are very true to life. We try to get stuff pretty close, if not totally exact.
Mm-hmm.
As for the model itself, that is very much MB's thing, but he and I will bounce back and forth when doing things like the markings on the weapons or small things that you may not be able to find references for.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And the point of this is it's not just some, I guess, futile pursuit of realism
Mm-hmm.
just so that we can flex on people and say, oh, our game is realistic. That's not the point. It's because it's a Roblox game, yes, but being able to offer a game where you log in, pick a weapon, and your preconceived notions of the weapon, whether you've shot it once at a range, whether you were issued it, whether you've had the privilege of seeing one fire, or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
where you have that notion in your mind of what the weapon's performance is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
and you use it in like what it's designed to be used in, and it does great. Like that is the point where a gun guy, not that there are that many gun guys in Roblox, but a gun guy, or really just if you're a dude who took a rabbit hole trip down Wikipedia and read everything about the AK5 or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and you go and pick an AK5 and it's what you expect it to be, then cool, mission accomplished.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. That's really in depth and really cool. So I'm not sure if you're the one that does it. I don't think you are, but do you go about the prices of weapons? Like, do you make those like in the attachments? Like, how do you decide that?
Um, I do actually decide that, but caveat, I've only decided it for things that were added post 6.0.7, so after the 416.
Gotcha.
Everything past the 416, I more or less decide the price on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and really, it's quite simple. Is for a weapon, we'll get the closest thing to its real life counterpart, or if we're lucky enough to find a unit price of the weapon,
Mm-hmm.
um, that will be it. That's why the PVS 31s cost 13,700 cash.
Yeah.
The unit that we use, one cash is equivalent to $1.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I always figured it kind of was, if I'm being honest, because I've noticed that there have been like some optics in the game that are like priced like really weirdly. Like they're like, oh, $1,396. I'm like, well, that's kind of specific, huh?
yeah,
So that makes a lot of
for
sense.
and I actually have a table that gives me like a scale. It's kind of not a bell curve, the opposite. I forgot what it's called. Um, yeah, it's kind of an inverted bell curve where the significance of the item goes goes up.
Mm-hmm.
As the significance of the item goes up, the price gets more true to life, and then past that, like even more significant,
Mm-hmm.
uh, then the price will go down again. So like, I'll drop a funny little example.
Mm-hmm.
On the very left side of this inverted bell curve, you have things like grips, uh, iron sights, and like rail covers, like small things.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle, you have weapons, uh, big ticket attachments like lasers, optics, and whatnot. And then on the other side of the bell curve, you have very expensive things like experimental weapons that we can't find a price for,
Mm-hmm.
vehicles like heavy weapons,
Mm-hmm.
aircraft, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So here,
Gotcha. So a lot of it is just basing it off of its real life counterparts once again.
pretty much,
Gotcha.
the that's what the that's where we get an idea of it, and then the importance of the item determines like how much it's multiplied by.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Gotcha. So I think.
So like here,
Mm-hmm.
try to draw this out in a somewhat concise manner.
are you going to like give me an example of what you mean?
I'll probably just paste this in. Like,
Gotcha.
actually, quite the opposite. It's not a inverted bell curve. Whatever. I'll send you a thing of what I mean, but basically, like things like a helicopter that's worth $20 million.
Mm-hmm.
No, not gonna charge a player $20 million for a helicopter. But a foregrip that costs like $5, maybe make the player pay like 30 or 50 for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then a weapon will be as much as it should cost.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That way you don't have to get players like me just to buy a Humvee or something like that.
Yeah.
Introduce down payments. That's what I say. Give those open world players what they deserve. There's the new content for them right there.
I'm not opposed.
When are we getting the license deal? When are we getting the Ford pickup truck? I think that's what we need, honestly.
I just find it funny how right now you pull it up and the stuff like shipping and handling is just subsidized. Like, no. No, let's charge people for that.
Mm-hmm. So you're a big gun guy, of course. So that makes me wonder if there's any guns that you would like to see be added into BRM5. Now, I know there's like major restrictions as to what can and can't be added, like specific weapon categories like revolvers won't be added into the game. So I know it's a little bit like restricted and has to be used by like a current military, but are there any like militaries or just like specific guns that you think would be really, really cool to be in BRM5?
Regarding revolvers specifically, I joke around. I post the same image over and over of it's like we technically don't allow revolvers, but there is one revolver that I'm perfectly fine with adding to the game because it is actually in current use, and I think it would add a lot of gameplay variety. And I'm perfectly fine with adding this. Like, I've talked about grenades for the longest time and how they're not mini nukes. Like, grenades are not magical.
Yeah.
And a grenade launcher like this probably wouldn't break the game.
Mm-hmm.
So something like that, cool.
That
Like if we had the
nothing.
mechanics to support it, I'm totally cool with that.
Can't say that was the revolver I was thinking of, but all right.
Yeah,
I can see
the
the mechanics.
MR73 can go fuck itself. Like people that try to find weird exceptions to that, it's like that's cool, man. Like it's technically issued, but I'm not gonna go take on a dude with one of those.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's the GIGN trust shot, you know? So, clearly that's a use case of revolver. Gotta add it. That's
And I think
what it
at
is.
some point, like, some people will say I'm really stuck up about this, and I am. Like, I admit to that. At some point, like, yeah, I think it's cool if we add the MR73 as, like, a fun reference. Even if it's absolutely useless, like, it's a thing, and we can do it.
Mm-hmm.
But not right now. Not when we still have a ton of weapon categories that haven't been added. Not when the gunplay is still yet to be brushed up.
Gotcha.
The last thing I want to do right now is just add a joke weapon that I now have to maintain stats for.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. All right, so I know you've talked about bullet penetration a couple times of wanting that to be added to the game, and this hasn't been brought up in this conversation just yet, but just like in general, you've mentioned bullet penetration be something that you want to be added to the game. But are there any other mechanics that you would like to see in BRM5, like tumbling?
Yeah, I mean, the whole tumbling thing, the physics involved in that is kind of outside of really any of our purview.
Mm-hmm.
The terminal ballistics thing, there's so much that goes into that
Be very difficult.
most games don't even factor in.
Mm-hmm.
What you're for damage like terminal ballistics, you're taking what is so much like biology, physics, and just even psychology in some cases,
Mm-hmm.
physiology. I'm just naming stuff off that like happens that affects, what a bullet does to someone. You're taking that and you're turning it into an arbitrary number that just that it has to consistently apply, or else the game isn't consistent.
Mm-hmm.
It's not predictable. You're doing that, so I'm perfectly fine with where damage itself is at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
What I would like to see, apart from bullet penetration, is bullet drag, where when a bullet flies through the air, it slows down depending on its ballistic coefficient.
Mm-hmm.
This is really difficult to do on Roblox.
Of course, of course.
And I talked with Nard about this previously, and he basically said like it would work, but it would not that it would work. It would be cool to add, but very, very unfeasible to add when so much in the game is tied to tick rate.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, especially when you fire so many bullets at a time on a loaded server, you know, against players, there's so many inconsistencies that can come up from that.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's not viable. So drag, I want it, but not really viable. The other thing that I wanted to do, and this is actually for the sake of balancing,
Mm-hmm.
is, how do I put this? Like a relationship between the weapon's operation and the parts you put on it. And let me explain. Like, people have asked for things like silencers to increase velocity a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
or to increase rate of fire a little bit, or to decrease rate of fire a little bit. And these are all real phenomenons that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it all has to do with the amount of gas that's being cycled back into the weapon's action. And it's not like I'm opposed to that. I'm a big fan of small, stupid details like this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a lot of math that has to be done. It's a lot of considerations that has to be done. And most importantly, it's a lot of provisions that NAR has to make for it to happen for really little gameplay value. Furthermore, if suppressors increased rate of fire and they reduced recoil a little bit and they reduce your signature, why wouldn't you run a suppressor? And that just begs the question, okay, how do we make suppressors, how do we increase the downsides of a suppressor but increase the upsides of not having one?
Mm-hmm.
And so every time I think about adding a mechanic, you know, it comes with all the other considerations of what that mechanic affects.
Mm-hmm.
Things like suppression, especially. I love machine guns. So getting machine guns to work in this game requires some kind of suppression mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
some kind of weapon stability mechanic,
Mm-hmm.
so that machine guns can be rested and properly fired. Things like ammo management. So I can name off a ton of features. Most of them just have to do with increasing the amount of factors that you have to consider as a player. And it's not to make your life as a player harder, it's actually to give you more options.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Very interesting. That's a lot right there. So I guess for really my final question here, are there any weapons or attachments that are in BRM5 that you feel like shouldn't be in the game? Like if there's one thing, if there's anything that you could remove and take off your plate, what would that be?
So I do have good news. Well, this is probably not good news, but there's a lot of stuff that I would like to remove that I can remove and I will remove in the near future. As for weapons, and I'll get back to those in just a bit, but as for weapons, like I would like to remove the Deagle and I'd like to remove the AA-12. I'd like to remove the Deagle, at least the 50 Action Express Deagle, because it's horribly impractical. I can understand the merits of having a hand cannon in game, and we can still have a hand cannon, just not a 50 AE Deagle.
Yeah.
And the AA-12. For one, It was submitted for trials with the Marine Corps, and it never really got adopted.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an excuse to add it in the game. It was added because it's a fun gun.
Yeah.
But it's a zero recoil shotgun that fires the same ammo as the M1014. Realistically, like apart it from it being heavy, there's little reason to pick it.
Mm-hmm.
To pick anything else. If we had a pump shotgun, no one's gonna pick the pump shotgun
Yeah.
because the A12 exists. I want to remove that.
Mm-hmm.
The fabled CZ or BE75, I don't actually want to remove it. I originally considered removing it, but I would rather add the mechanics to just give it all the proper downsides. The weapon actually fires incredibly fast, like 1,000, 1,200 rounds per minute.
Mm-hmm.
It's missing that magazine grip everyone knows about, but adding the magazine grip means we have to add a new reload animation for that particular magazine. We have to increase certain handling characteristics. We'd have to completely revisit the way recoil works because right now it's very controllable.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of weapons that I've looked at and I thought, hey, let's remove it. But in reality, they just need more mechanics to really be at their full potential.
Mm-hmm.
As for attachments, this is an easy one. The fabled reflex sight that everyone seems to love right now because it has a tiny window and it weighs nothing, that's going away.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a whole lot of other stuff. There's some weapons with like proprietary suppressors. Most of them I want to remove, assuming they're not like actual. They don't like. If it's not something that's actually used on it, I don't want it to be there. The M110 has unique suppressors, and those are cool.
Mm-hmm.
The P90, it has its own muzzle brake. That's fine. It's got a suppressor. I have no clue who makes it.
Mm-hmm.
If someone knows about it, like I'd be happy to find that out. But stuff that really just doesn't belong, I'd rather remove. But everything else, for the most part, I'm fine with staying. Like even the C7, I'm fine with keeping the C7, just making it attainable in some other way. I'd rather not remove it outright.
Mm-hmm.
When something breaks the meta, I generally try to stay away from, okay, let's just remove it, but like, why is it a meta weapon, and how do we address that?
Mm-hmm. So, you did mention that you might consider removing the AA-12 because it's not technically in service. So, would you just like outright remove that from the game, or would you rather just like do basically what the C7A2 does, where it's just unobtainable? Like people who already have it keep it, but new players can't get it.
The C7A2 is kind of a confusing thing because it really should just be a shop purchasable weapon. It's very good. Anyways, back to the AA-12. In a perfect world, I would just remove it outright, and no one would complain.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people are going to complain.
Yeah.
And honestly, when it comes to removing stuff from the game, especially like let alone big things like weapons, removing a weapon for one is overwriting data in the player's inventory and doing it in a way that doesn't totally brick everyone's main menus.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a few nightmares with that, especially in the early stages of Resurgence, where people's stuff didn't get migrated properly.
Yeah.
And so some people lost items. Some people had things that they shouldn't have had. Some things were purchasable that shouldn't have been there. Or worse, some people just could not get into the menu. So that's something that we really don't like to do because it's so unstable.
Mm-hmm.
The A12, begrudgingly at least, is probably going to stay.
Mm-hmm.
But not a whole lot's going to happen with it. It's just going to stay in its nice little corner. It's not going to get like a drum magazine or better ammo or anything. It's just going to stay there and do its thing.
Gotcha. I'm really glad you brought up the drum magazine because how did the AA-12 get a 24 round box mag at one point? How did that happen?
This was before I started working on it, and I never really got a concrete explanation. But what I assume happened was in the rushed release resurgence in time, a lot of the stats were just haphazardly rushed and not tested
Mm-hmm.
properly. The AA-12 had a 24 round box magazine that didn't even exist.
Yeah.
A lot of our extended mags, even now, are just normal magazines, but with a little bit of length on the bottom plate.
Mm-hmm.
I've quietly not outright removed, but took those ones off sale with the intention of removing them down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
it's also how we got things like the G36 with its three weird barrel lengths, none of which actually exist. It's like a 13 something, a 14.5, and like a 16. Basically, like the G36 kind of got the short end of the stick, but for some reason it had like this ludicrous damage increase on the long barrel, even though it only added like half an inch.
Mm-hmm.
Just small things like that, where it's like it's very clear that we weren't able to put enough thought into these, which is part of the reason why I was probably tasked to do it, was because there are so many considerations that have to be made with these, and not everyone has the time to do them.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Also, since I know this isn't really like, even if you do know the answer, I'm not sure if it's something you could really tell me or I guess the broader community as well. The one thing that's always kind of bothered me is the quest update came out, right?
Yep.
The Groza got added, which I'm fine with. You know, the Groza's cool and all that. But I think one thing that always bothered me is that it seemed like the quest update was added, and then nothing's ever really come from it. You know, like there had, because I felt like there would have been more guns that would have been added in the quest update. I could be completely wrong, but I guess that's how I interpreted it as, is that we'd occasionally get, you know, like a new gun that you could only get through the quest update. So I could be wrong on that. I don't know if there's anything you can even say about that, like anything you can tease. But I just felt like the quest update has like quite a bit of potential to it, of course, and it was kind of shocking to me to only see like, oh hey, here's money and experience, which doesn't matter to, you know, players like me, of course. But like, hey, here's a new gun. It's like, okay, that's a great incentive right there. And then that was it, really. Of course, there was uniforms, flashlights, and I think a couple other things I can't think of right now. But you know, that's not the meta, so to speak. So I don't know if there's anything you can say about that. If you can, please do. But
There's some, but it's mostly like a retrospective. Just
mm-hmm.
I did basically all of the story writing and dialogue writing for the quest update. I did all the character design, making sure that um the personalities and stuff were there, and also arranged uh what was going to be the complete lineup of rewards
Mm-hmm.
for those characters. Um, it's when you see that the American and the Russian NPC have complete 5-part single tier award trees, and then the Australian, the British, and you know the other NPCs they don't.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of speaks to how limited we were as far as stuff to add for it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think because the reception was the way it was, where Quest was not like this big game changer for uh, the game's like player retention or concurrent player count,
Mm-hmm.
we never really turned our attention back to that, which is a shame because there's a lot of stuff, at least in my, like that was my biggest project
Mm-hmm.
for last year was the Quest update
Gotcha.
by far. Like I probably put the most time of anyone into just um that's probably not true, but I put a shit ton of time into that. And
Yeah.
my I had a lot bigger ambitions for it, not just the characters, but the quests themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is where like you can't really blame anything but the limitations of the engine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the quests were I had big visions for them, like actual big firefights. The logistics quests were meant to be accompanied by enemy encounters, like in an actual convoy,
Mm-hmm.
not just dragging a trailer around. But the more and more we experimented with trying to get quests certain ways, just the more problems arose.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to be significantly scaled back. Even the most fun, quote unquote, quests in the game are really not anywhere close to what I was imagining them to be.
Gotcha.
And this is me speaking as not a programmer. I'm just a game design dude.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, my vision for whatever the quests are going to be is very disconnected from what the reality is.
Mm-hmm.
As for weapons, there are actually 4 unreleased characters, and I had plans to add several more on the military side in order to award weapons specifically. So things like the C7 were going to make their return
Mm-hmm.
through quests, originally at least, through a Canadian character.
Of course.
Um, but this did not end up happening, and ever since then we've kind of turned our attention to different approaches to do this, which
Gotcha.
you'll probably see within the next year or so.
Okay. Cool. It was just kind of sad, I think, even from like a player standpoint, just to see like how much care and basically how much thought and effort was put into the quest update, and then not too much came out of it besides like the Groza, which of course was like the major point for like everybody was like, oh hey, look, new gun, you know, and then people started getting it, and was like, oh well, it's just kind of like a worse AK-103 because no attachments.
Yeah, and I think we kind of invested too much in like certain areas, and I think there was a lot more that could have been done to kind of control where the player attention went.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing with the Groza is like it was never meant to be this meta breaking gun. That's actually expressly not what we want to do, is make people feel like they're forced to play uh PvE just to unlock a gun.
Yeah.
Um which is why it's just demonstrably worse in most ways than the AK-103, which is already a pretty lackluster weapon.
Mm-hmm.
We were not about to shove like the next C7 or the next AUG in there.
Yeah, gotcha. Now, I know this not on like the question list either, but I feel like I might as well go ahead and ask how like. Well, you haven't been doing it as much since like the HK416 had got dropped, so I'm not sure if there's anything that you would really know about this. But was there ever like guns that you would push out like with the stats that they had, and you're like, okay, this is gonna immediately like break the meta, or this is gonna like shift everything, or this is too good, we're gonna need to nerf it pretty quickly after it comes out. Like, has there ever been one of those moments?
No, yeah. So when the FAMAS came out, like I immediately knew this is a rifle length barrel through with it's a 5.56 through rifle length barrel. So amazing damage with ludicrously high rate of fire, and the only real downsides we have is above average recoil and slightly below average magazine size and a slow-ish reload. Now, I was going through it and testing. It's like I know that this is going to happen, that the meta is going to eat this up. And I think part of it is just that it's a new hotness and everyone wants to try it. But I think it's kind of toned down since, and the FAMAS has kind of been like, it's a fun weapon, but it's not necessarily like the most flexible.
Mm-hmm.
But there are weapons that are like so, off the cuff, so to speak, where it's like I know this is going to change things.
Mm-hmm.
And I constantly told myself this throughout testing with the FAMAS, and it's like I could like make the reserve ammo absolutely horrible on this weapon, or we can make the recoil even higher, or make the weapon burst only. But that really does just screw with the identity of the weapon. You buy a FAMAS thinking this is going to be a zippy,
Mm-hmm.
fast weapon. So
Yeah.
like we can't screw with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you expect to have a FAMAS. And anyone that's been waiting for the FAMAS, it's like, sure, we might upset some parts of the PvP community because the meta is changing.
Mm.
But we also have people who really want the FAMAS to be added faithfully. And if we just butcher the weapon, like, that's also a problem.
Of course.
And from our point of view, we'd rather appeal to the, I don't want to say enthusiast, but again, the people we're trying to please with this attention to detail really is like the gun guys, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. That's why I've always appreciated the attention to detail and stuff that's gone into the weaponry. Because it really is just like the small little details that do stack up and make the game, or I guess make the guns more specifically, make the guns more interesting to use, and they all have their unique traits to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like, and both Envy and I fully concede, like, we've had constant conversations about, like, you know, what'd be funny is if we add this and nobody fucking notices it. And we have this conversation almost every single time a weapon is modeled, textured, added, whatever.
Yeah.
Constantly remind us of ourselves of this, but it's like, yeah, that's true. Most of the player base probably isn't going to see this, but like the 2 or 3 people who know this small detail are going to look at this and be like, yo, they did their research.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what is fine for me. And it's also just like, this is also a passion project in a way. Like, being able to invest this amount of attention to detail in something is also a sign that we're not just trying to cash cow this, so to speak. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we want to have this kind of a collection of weapons, not even be our own, so to speak, just be one of the best representations on the platform.
Of course. Quality over quantity, really.
Yeah, that's where we're trying to go.
Makes sense. All right, well, that's pretty much all the questions I have for you. If there's anything else that you would like to talk about, go ahead. Just anything else, literally anything you can think of right now. Any message you want to give. Now is your time to shine.
No, it's not really about me. I know I talked a lot. This is really long-winded. It's been an hour-ish and a half.
The recording is going for an hour and 32 minutes right now.
Yup. So you can have fun with that. Like,
I'm not. I don't want to edit this.
Yeah.
This is probably just gonna be like one
yeah.
big podcast episode, if I'm being honest with you.
That's fair. I've edited a few podcasts and it was never enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
But I got nothing else. If you got nothing else, we can just call it good here.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So.
All right, sweet.